I moved into Westvale Springs, an upscale, gated community in the heart of suburban America, 8 months ago. It was supposed to be a fresh start. After a tumultuous year battling anxiety and depression, I had decided that a change of scenery might bring me some peace. My doctor had also suggested that I apply for an emotional support animal, ESA, to help manage my symptoms. That's how Luna, a gentle golden retriever with big brown eyes and a tail that wagged at the slightest show of affection, became my constant companion. On my second day in the neighborhood, I learned that Westvale Springs came with a robust homeowners association. I had always heard stories, some neutral, some complaining about strict lawn regulations, and some comedic, all focusing on how HOAs sometimes attracted individuals who loved flexing their authority. I wasn't prepared for how true those tales could be. Karen was the self-appointed overseer of everything in Westvale Springs. It wasn't enough that she was on the official HOA board. She seemed to be on a personal mission to maintain the prestige of the community in the most invasive ways possible. She'd stride down the sidewalks at sunrise, scanning for any violation she could note: an incorrectly placed mailbox, a weed in a flower bed, or a front door that didn't meet her standards of aesthetic perfection. I had a run-in with her the very first weekend I moved in. I was out walking Luna, trying to familiarize us both with the winding roads and the pristine, albeit slightly soulless, landscaping. Karen popped up like a jack-in-the-box from behind a row of carefully trimmed hedges. "Hello. You must be new," she said with an icy smile that contrasted with her squeaky, saccharine tone. "I'm on the HOA board. Name's Karen. Just wanted to ensure you're acquainted with our rules regarding pets." Her eyes flickered from me to Luna, who wagged her tail in polite greeting. Karen did not stoop to pet her. Instead, she continued with a tight, forced grin. "We have guidelines, maximum leash length, designated waste disposal bins, and, of course, restrictions on service and therapy animals in certain common areas." I remember blinking, unsure if I'd heard her correctly. "Restrictions on therapy animals?" I repeated. "I thought federal guidelines for emotional support animals." Karen cut me off. "We interpret those a bit differently here," she said smoothly, as though she and the rest of the HOA had the authority to override federal law. "Anyway, it's something you should be aware of. We do enforce the rules." Right then, I realized my life in Westvale Springs might not be as peaceful as I had hoped. Weeks passed, and for the most part, my day-to-day life settled into a routine. I worked from home as a freelance graphic designer, and Luna would usually curl up at my feet while I sketched logos and web layouts for clients. In the evenings, we took walks around the neighborhood. I took pains to follow every rule, picking up after Luna without fail, keeping her on a short leash, and even avoiding walking her near gardens that might be considered off-limits. Yet, somehow, Karen seemed to manifest out of thin air whenever I felt the slightest shred of comfort or relaxation. One of her favorite tactics was to casually mention some violation or potential rule. She never outright accused me of anything, at least not initially. Instead, she'd say, "Good afternoon. Saw your little friend's leash is exactly at 6 feet today. That's perfect. Some people think they can go up to 8 or 10, but that's a real risk, you know. We do have coyotes occasionally." Or she'd saunter over when I was planting tulips in my front yard. "Just wanted to let you know about the community's color palette guidelines for flowers. We generally stick to neutrals and soft pastels, but I'm sure your arrangement won't be too bold." I kept my annoyance in check, hoping she would eventually find someone else to pester. But it soon became clear that Karen believed it was her mission to ensure I conformed to every nuance of the HOA's regulations, including some rules that seemed to exist only in her own mind. The tipping point came one sunny Saturday afternoon. The HOA had organized a poolside meet and greet, where new residents were encouraged to mingle with longtime homeowners. Determined to make a good impression, I decided to join. Of course, Luna was at my side. Typically, therapy dogs aren't subjected to strict no-pets rules because they provide essential emotional support, and, in many states and under various regulations, they're allowed in common areas unless there's a specific exception that's legally valid. I had come prepared with a letter from my mental health professional in case it was needed. No sooner had I stepped foot onto the pool deck than Karen stormed up to me, her face twisted in a mix of indignation and feigned concern. "We don't allow dogs in the pool area," she hissed. "You should know better." I held her gaze, trying to stay calm. "Luna is my emotional support animal," I said, offering the letter I kept in an envelope. "I have documentation from my doctor, and it—" Karen didn't even glance at the papers. "This is a family event," she snapped, her voice rising. "We can't have animals running around upsetting the neighbors." You can stand outside the fence if you like, but you can't bring that dog in here." I felt my face flush. Many people around us had gone silent, obviously curious about the unfolding drama. "Karen, this is an ESA. She's allowed in common areas under federal guidelines," I tried to explain. "I'm aware some HOAs have specific rules, but those can't violate." Karen raised a hand, silencing me. "I'm on the board," she said, that same smug grin plastered on her face. "I think I know what we can and cannot do. This isn't up for debate." That day, I left the pool with my heart pounding and tears threatening to spill. Luna looked up at me, worried, sensing my distress. It wasn't just about being turned away from a community event. It was the principle of the matter. Karen had publicly shamed me, and she was attempting to deny me a right that, by law, I was entitled to have. My mental health had improved since having Luna, and now I felt cast out and humiliated. Later that evening, while scrolling through my emails at home, I found a message from Sharon, one of my neighbors I'd briefly met during a morning jog. She apologized for not intervening earlier and expressed her concerns about Karen's attitude. She, too, had witnessed more than one confrontation involving Karen and other residents. "She does this to new people," Sharon wrote. "You're not alone. We're trying to put together a group to address these power plays." I breathed a sigh of relief. Part of me had felt isolated, but it turned out that I wasn't the only target of Karen's overreach. Over the next few weeks, I discovered a small but growing community of neighbors who were fed up with Karen. Some had been fined for inconsequential offenses like having a flower pot that didn't match the prescribed color scheme. Others had been told their Christmas decorations were too showy and needed to be taken down. More disturbingly, a few had also faced her wrath over their emotional support or service animals. Sarah, a retired nurse with a hearing dog, had once been berated because her dog's harness was too bright and clashed with the HOA's color aesthetic. Another neighbor, Keith, had a therapy cat that Karen insisted remain indoors permanently, even though a therapy cat, on a harness, was permitted in shared outdoor areas. Each of these stories mirrored my own, and they all had one common denominator: Karen's unwavering conviction that her interpretation of the rules trumped everything else. We decided to meet informally in Sharon's backyard, away from prying eyes, to share our experiences. 6 of us showed up, each with a story about Karen's bullying. We realized we needed to gather proof, not just anecdotes. Sharon, who had some background in local activism, advised that we keep records: times, dates, what was said, witnesses, and any supporting evidence like letters or emails. "What do we do once we have all that?" I asked, my mind reeling. I had never been part of anything remotely like this, confronting a powerful figure in the community. "We bring it to the rest of the HOA board," Sharon said with a determined glint in her eye. "And if that doesn't work, we contact the local housing authority or even a lawyer." A hush fell over the group. We all knew that taking on Karen wouldn't be easy. She had allies among some of the older board members who believed that her overzealous enforcement was what kept Westvale Springs clean, safe, and exclusive. But it was clear we were on a collision course. With every new day, Karen seemed more brazen, more confident in her ability to intimidate us. Yet, there was an undercurrent of hope in our small gathering. We were no longer alone. We had each other's backs, and we had stories that pointed to a pattern of harassment. Despite the anxiety swirling in my chest, I felt a spark of determination. For the sake of Luna and everyone else's beloved pets, those that were actually performing life-altering support for their owners, we had to stand up. The next confrontation came 2 weeks after the pool incident. Our neighborhood had a pretty little green space with benches, walking paths, and a small playground. According to the HOA rules, leash dogs were allowed in designated sections of the park. Emotional support animals, in particular, were to be permitted anywhere a resident was allowed, so long as the handler ensured the animal behaved well. Eager to enjoy a sunny afternoon, I decided to bring Luna there while finishing some sketches on my tablet. I set up under a shady elm tree, letting Luna rest at my feet on a soft blanket. We were minding our own business when a familiar shadow fell across my screen. I looked up to see Karen looming above me, hands on her hips. "You again," she said coolly. "Don't you have anywhere else to be?" I swallowed the flash of anger surging inside me. "Luna and I have every right to be here," I replied, doing my best to stay calm and courteous. "Is that so?" she shot back, her voice rising. A few parents near the playground side-eyed us, clearly aware of who Karen was. "I happen to know a lot about your dog situation," she continued. And I'm pretty sure that a therapy dog doesn't automatically have the same rights as a service dog. You can't just waltz her around in community spaces because you feel like it. I pointed to a sign that clearly stated, "Dogs must remain on leash. Service animals and emotional support animals are allowed in all public areas." It was right there, posted by the HOA itself, probably before Karen had seized so much influence. Karen ignored the sign. "That rule is outdated," she snapped. "We're working to revise it for the safety and comfort of all residents. After all, you can't just let an untrained pet roam free." "She's not roaming free," I protested, my voice trembling with frustration. "She's on a leash, she's not barking, and she's not bothering anyone. Why is this a problem?" "Because it's disruptive," Karen hissed through clenched teeth. "We have children playing, and some might be allergic or scared. It's not fair that you bring your dog here without considering other people's needs." The hypocrisy of that statement left me speechless momentarily. She wasn't considering my needs, my mental health needs that Luna helped me manage. This was about her personal belief that therapy animals weren't legitimate, so she felt entitled to harass me. Before I could formulate a response, one of the moms from the playground, a woman named Becky whom I chatted with once or twice, walked over. "Excuse me, is everything okay here?" she asked, her eyes flicking between Karen and me. Karen adopted a sickly sweet tone. "We're just clarifying some rules," she said. "I'm on the HOA board, and this young lady is unaware that therapy dogs don't have the same rights as service animals, especially in shared spaces." Becky glanced from Karen to me, then down to Luna, who was lying quietly, tail wagging at Becky's approach. "She's not hurting anyone," Becky observed. "I have kids here, and they're not bothered. In fact, they like seeing a friendly dog around." Karen's mask of politeness flickered. "Well, if you're comfortable, that's fine, but we must think of all residents. And as a board member, I have a responsibility to enforce." Becky cut her off. "Karen, the sign says emotional support animals are allowed. She's got her dog on a leash, so why is this even an argument?" A few other onlookers began nodding. Karen's expression turned stony. It was one thing to bully me when no one else intervened, but having a small audience side against her was new territory. She tried once more, raising her chin defiantly. "The board will be voting on new rules soon. If the motion passes, none of you will be allowed to bring your so-called emotional support pets to public areas. I'm just giving you a heads up." With that, she spun on her heel and stalked away. Becky shook her head in disbelief. "I'm so sorry you're dealing with that," she whispered. "Karen." Well, Karen is Karen. My hands were shaking as I thanked Becky for her support. Though Karen had retreated for now, her threat hung in the air. She was actively trying to change the HOA rules to restrict emotional support animals from common areas. I realized it was time to escalate our efforts. That evening, I called Sharon to fill her in on the confrontation at the park. She listened intently, asking me to jot down the details: time, place, words spoken. "We need to show a pattern," she said. "We can't just say Karen is discriminating or harassing us. We need specifics." Over the next few days, I contacted an attorney who specialized in housing law and explained the situation. His name was Mr. Halpern, and he had a calm, reassuring voice that immediately set me at ease. After hearing my account and reviewing the pictures of posted signs that said ESAs were allowed, he said, "You have a strong case here. Federal guidelines do protect your right to have an ESA in shared residential areas, with very few exceptions. An HOA can't arbitrarily decide to exclude ESAs unless they can prove the animal is a direct threat or causes undue hardship, which clearly doesn't apply to Luna." I felt a wave of relief, but also a pang of guilt. I was reluctant to transform my new home into a legal battleground. Yet, hearing Mr. Halpern's confidence reminded me that I wasn't powerless. If I had to go that route, I would. In the meantime, the group Sharon had assembled grew larger. Word spread through hushed conversations, text chains, and discreet chats over fences. More residents emerged, sharing their Karen stories: couples, retirees, single parents, people from all walks of life. Some had disabilities and used service animals, while others, like me, had emotional support animals for mental health conditions. Each had faced some form of intimidation. We formalized our group by meeting regularly in different backyards, rotating locations to avoid Karen's prying eyes. During these sessions, We gathered copies of official ESA letters, housing guidelines, and every relevant HOA bylaw. Sharon took meticulous notes, highlighting the specific sections that Karen was brazenly ignoring. Once we have everything compiled, we'll request time to speak at the next HOA board meeting, Sharon declared. We'll present our case in front of the entire board and demand that they honor state and federal law. A nervous energy crackled among us, but we agreed on the plan. Meanwhile, tension in the neighborhood grew. Karen seemed to sense that something was brewing. She became more vigilant, more eager to confront. Residents who'd never had issues before now found warning letters in their mailboxes for minuscule things like grass an inch too tall or bird feeders that allegedly attracted pests. It was like Karen was flailing, trying desperately to clamp down before we could unseat her iron grip on the community's regulations. About a month after the park incident, an email circulated from the HOA secretary announcing a special board meeting. The agenda was alarmingly vague, mentioning only updates to pet and service animal policies. Sharon forwarded it to our entire group with a note. This is it. They're going to try to push through the rule changes before we can speak. She wasn't wrong. The special meeting was scheduled on a Tuesday at noon, a time most working people couldn't attend. It was a blatant attempt to avoid scrutiny from concerned residents. Nonetheless, we rallied. We took personal days off work, arranged babysitters, and carved out time to be there. We mobilized quickly, sharing rides and ensuring each of us was well prepared with printed documents and notes. The morning of the meeting, I felt a churn of anxiety in my gut. My mind raced with questions. Would the board even let us speak? Would they care about our evidence? What if they sided with Karen without hearing us out? Luna sensed my nerves, resting her head on my lap and offering quiet comfort. The meeting took place in a small conference room at the HOA office, a modest building near the gated entrance of Westvale Springs. A handful of folding chairs were set up for residents. Karen sat at the center of the long table at the front, flanked by 3 other board members. Mr. Adams, who seemed friendly enough, Mrs. Nichols, who rarely spoke but often nodded in agreement with Karen, and Mr. Winchester, an older gentleman known for being a stickler for the smallest infractions. The HOA president, a man named Robert Jenkins, was notably absent. We later learned he had a business trip and delegated Karen to run this informal session. When we filed in, Karen's jaw visibly tightened. She clearly hadn't expected so many of us to show up. The moment the clock hit noon, she banged the gavel. We're here to discuss an urgent matter, revising pet regulations to align with the community's best interests, she began with a saccharine smile. Before we dive into that, we'll open the floor to any quick remarks from residents. We have 15 minutes. Sharon stood, clearing her throat. We appreciate the opportunity to speak. We understand there's a proposed policy that would restrict emotional support animals from common areas, correct? Karen gave a tight nod. That's one possibility under consideration. Well, Sharon continued, we've gathered evidence that such a policy would conflict with federal guidelines under the Fair Housing Act and various state laws that protect individuals with disabilities, including mental health conditions requiring ESAs. We'd like to present. Karen raised her hand, her eyes flitting to the clock on the wall. We only have a few minutes, so please be concise. Sharon swallowed her frustration and handed out printed copies of the legal statutes, case precedents, and official ESA documentation from multiple residents, including me. We want the board to realize that these animals are not merely pets. They provide crucial support. We also have letters from mental health professionals attesting to their necessity. And the signage in our community explicitly states ESAs are allowed. If the HOA tries to override federal law, it could open the association to serious legal repercussions. A murmur of agreement rippled through the residents. Mr. Adams took a copy of the documents, looking genuinely interested. Mrs. Nichols appeared uneasy. Mr. Winchester pursed his lips, but even he seemed uncertain how to counter the federal guidelines plainly printed before him. Karen, however, was unmoved. We're not saying people with legitimate disabilities can't have service animals, she said, her tone silky. We're just concerned about the abuse of the term ESA by residents who want to bring ordinary pets anywhere they please. It's a matter of safety and sanitation. These support animals sometimes bark, shed fur, or even bite. Her words sparked outrage in the room. A father with a young boy on the autism spectrum rose, trembling with anger. "My son's therapy dog has never bitten anyone," he said. "She's well-trained and helps him navigate his environment. How dare you suggest we're faking?" Karen gave a patronizing smile. "There are always good owners, but it's the irresponsible ones we worry about. We need stronger measures to ensure the safety of the whole community." Sharon was ready to retort, but Karen abruptly stood. "We're running out of time," she declared. "We'll take your documents under advisement, but ultimately the board will decide." Meeting adjourned. She banged the gavel again and marched out, followed by Mrs. Nichols and Mr. Winchester. Mr. Adams lingered, shuffling the papers, looking conflicted. "We'll review everything," he said quietly, then hurried after the others. A wave of frustration and disappointment washed over us. "That wasn't a meeting," someone muttered. "It was a sham." Yet, a seed of hope remained. We had shown up in force, and Karen had seen that we wouldn't be silent. With Mr. Adams at least willing to look at our evidence, perhaps all was not lost. In the days following the special meeting, Karen escalated her efforts to quash dissent. Suddenly, residents who had spoken out found themselves receiving violation notices for the most trivial reasons: a garden hose left uncoiled, a porch light that didn't meet brightness standards, or a mailbox that needed a fresh coat of paint. It was obvious these infractions were targeted. The tension in Westvale Springs felt like a simmering pot about to boil over. For me, Karen's retaliation took the form of constant harassment about Luna. Despite the posted signs and existing policies, she left voicemails warning me that further action would be taken if I continued to bring Luna into certain shared spaces, including the sidewalks near the mail center. The idea that an HOA board member would think she could ban my ESA from a sidewalk was baffling, but it spoke volumes about Karen's inflated sense of authority. On top of that, I received a formal letter demanding that I submit proper verification of Luna's status as an ESA. The letter was signed by Karen in her capacity as the HOA Pet Regulations Coordinator, a made-up title, no doubt. I had already provided documentation once, but I complied again, sending copies of the official letter from my therapist and relevant legal guidelines. Within a week, I got another letter stating my documents were insufficient and that the HOA needed more information regarding my medical condition. That crossed a line. By law, they couldn't demand details about my mental health diagnosis or my private medical history. This was the final straw. I forwarded the entire letter trail to Mr. Halpern, my attorney. "They're bordering on violation of my privacy rights now," I wrote in my email. He responded within the hour. "They've already crossed that line. Let me handle it." That same day, Sharon told me that half a dozen other residents received similar letters requesting invasive personal details. Each of them had an ESA or service animal. It was clearly Karen's attempt to fish for information she could use to discredit or intimidate them. But the more she pushed, the more galvanized we became. Ironically, the annual Westvale Springs block party was organized by Karen herself. In the past, it was a lavish affair with catered food, live music, and a raffle. This year, many residents planned to boycott it in protest of Karen's bullying. However, Sharon hatched an idea. Why not use the event to our advantage? The logic was simple. The block party usually drew a large crowd, including some of the more neutral board members and the overall Westvale Springs population. If we made our presence known and brought along our well-behaved ESAs, everyone would see firsthand that these animals were not the nuisances Karen claimed. Moreover, it would be an opportunity to gather more community support. A flurry of messages went out. Bring your emotional support or service animal if you're comfortable doing so. We'll show everyone what a difference they make in our lives. The plan was simple but high risk. It could provoke Karen into a meltdown, but maybe that would finally expose her harassment for what it was. On the day of the party, I arrived with Luna right by my side. A small group of us, 8 or 10, had gathered at the edge of the cul-de-sac where tables of food, a stage, and decorations were set up. Families milled about, children played games, and neighbors chatted amicably. It looked like a scene out of a magazine, except for the undercurrent of tension we carried with us. Almost immediately, I spotted Karen near a balloon archway, giving instructions to a vendor. When she turned around and caught sight of our group, her eyes widened. Several of us had ESAs or service animals in tow, therapy dogs wearing vests, a guide dog for a visually impaired resident, and even Keith's therapy cat on a secure harness. Karen recovered quickly, striding toward us with the determination of a general marching into battle. "This is not acceptable," she said, her voice unnervingly calm. "I warn all of you that changes are underway. You're all in violation of—" "No, Karen," Sharon interrupted, stepping forward. "We're not in violation of anything. These animals are protected under federal law. You have no right to order us away." The crowd around us began to pay attention, some pausing mid-bite or mid-conversation. Karen raised her voice. "This is my event. I organized it. And I say no animals, unless they are legitimate service dogs with proven training. This is a health and safety hazard." A hush fell over the crowd. My heart pounded as I anticipated what might happen next. Some of the board members were watching. Mr. Adams was there, whispering something to Mr. Winchester. Mrs. Nichols hovered behind them with her lips pressed into a thin line. One of the residents, a young mother named Talia, spoke up, holding her ESA letter high. "I have panic disorder. My doctor prescribed my dog to help me cope. Who are you to decide what's legitimate?" Karen's cheeks turned a blotchy red. "You want me to believe every single one of these mutts is medically necessary? Give me a break. This is just a ploy to bring your pets wherever you want." Angry murmurs rippled through the crowd. She had insulted people's cherished companions, animals that were crucial to their day-to-day well-being. Karen was outnumbered, but she didn't back down. She started flinging accusations left and right, her voice grating in the thick summer air. Suddenly, Mr. Adams cleared his throat loudly. He stepped in between Karen and Talia. "Enough," he said, raising his hands to signal calm. "As a board member, I've been reviewing the documentation these residents provided. They have legitimate ESA certifications and letters from licensed professionals. There's no reason to bar them from a public event, especially as the current HO rules state they're allowed." Karen's jaw dropped. It was the first time she'd been publicly contradicted by a fellow board member. The tension escalated to a fever pitch. Everyone waited to see how she would respond. But just then, the band on stage started up, filling the air with upbeat music. The moment for a dramatic showdown ended in a strange anticlimax as the drums drowned out Karen's next words. She looked at Mr. Adams, then at the gathering of outraged residents, then at the larger crowd, families, neighbors, everyone craning their necks to see what would happen. Finally, Karen turned on her heel and stormed off, disappearing behind a row of concession stands. The relief was palpable. We'd stood our ground, and we had the backing of at least one board member. Still, a knot of anxiety remained in my stomach. I knew Karen wouldn't let this humiliation go unanswered. The day after the block party, I woke up to a loud banging on my front door. Luna barked once, alert but not aggressive. My heart leaped into my throat as I went to open it, half expecting to find Karen waving some new violation notice. Instead, it was Tim, one of the security guards for our gated community, looking frantic. "Your dog," he stammered. "The HOA got a complaint saying Luna attacked someone last night." Karen insisted on filing a formal incident report. He held out a piece of paper with a typed statement. "This is serious. If it's verified, the HOA could force you to remove your dog pending an investigation." Shock flashed through me. "That's impossible. Luna was with me all night. She never attacked anyone. She wouldn't hurt a fly." Tim grimaced. "I'm sorry. The report specifically names your dog and claims she bit a child near the bounce house. But the description of the incident is vague. No time, no specifics about injuries. It just says the child was traumatized and left the party early." Anger flooded me. This was Karen's retaliation, her attempt to weaponize the HOA's rules about animal aggression. If a pet is deemed dangerous or if there's a credible complaint of violence, the HOA can demand its removal from the premises. Clearly, someone had fabricated a story to frame Luna. I immediately called Sharon, my voice trembling with outrage. She gasped at the news. "They're trying to paint you as the neighbor with a vicious dog? That's insane. Everyone saw Luna at the party. She was calm the entire time." "Exactly," I said, pacing my living room. "But how do I prove a negative that Luna didn't attack someone?" "We'll find witnesses," Sharon replied confidently. "So many residents were there. Some must have pictures or videos. Karen can't just conjure up a victim out of thin air and expect no one to question it." We launched a frantic search. Within hours, neighbors sent me phone clips and photos from the party. In every single image or video, Luna was either sitting quietly by my feet or being petted by friendly residents. There was zero evidence of aggression, let alone a bite incident. No one had seen or heard anything resembling a dog attack, and we couldn't find anyone who knew of a supposedly injured child. Still, Karen persisted. She refused to provide the name of the complainant, citing confidentiality. The HOA's letter demanded that I remove Luna from the premises while an investigation was carried out, or else face hefty fines. The injustice of it made my blood boil. It was one thing to quibble about leashes or flower colors, but to slander an innocent animal was a cruelty I hadn't expected. The next morning, I sat at my kitchen table with Mr. Halpern, who had come to review all the evidence I'd gathered. I played every video clip, scrolled through every photo, and showed him the reams of text messages from neighbors attesting to Luna's good behavior. He took careful notes, occasionally nodding thoughtfully. When I finished, he closed his laptop and folded his hands. "This is a blatant attempt at harassment," he said. "They have no evidence to support the accusation, and we have multiple witnesses and documented proof to the contrary. I'll draft a formal response to the HOA, demanding they retract the complaint. If they don't comply, we can file a legal claim for defamation and discrimination, given this is targeting your ESA." A wave of relief passed over me, though anxiety still gnawed at the edges of my mind. As Mr. Halpern left, Sharon and two other neighbors, Talia and Keith, arrived. They brought fresh coffee and determined smiles. "We're going to rally the neighborhood," Sharon said. "We'll circulate a petition demanding that the HOA drop the false charges against Luna and cease all discriminatory practices against ESAs." Within hours, the petition was live. Signatures poured in online and in person. Parents who'd seen Luna's gentle nature at the block party were especially incensed by the accusation that she had attacked a child. Even residents who didn't own pets felt compelled to stand up against such a blatant lie. It was the largest wave of unity Westvale Springs had seen in a long time. By day's end, nearly half the community had signed. That evening, the petition was hand-delivered to the HOA office, along with a letter from Mr. Halpern outlining potential legal consequences if the baseless complaint wasn't immediately withdrawn. Tension hung in the air like a storm cloud. We were waiting for the board's next move, uncertain how far Karen would push. As the days ticked by without an official response from the HOA, rumors swirled. Some people said Karen was scrambling to find a single witness who would corroborate her fabricated story, but nobody wanted to commit perjury. Others whispered that certain board members were furious with Karen for dragging them into potential legal trouble. Meanwhile, life in Westvale Springs felt like a pressure cooker. Neighbors eyed each other warily, not knowing who was on Karen's side or who might be manipulated next. Twice, I spotted Karen's car rolling slowly past my house, as if she was looking for any new infraction she could pin on me. My anxiety soared, but Luna's comforting presence eased the worst of it. One late afternoon, a knock at my door startled me. I opened it to find Mr. Adams, the friendly board member, looking exhausted. "Can I come in for a minute?" he asked. I nodded, stepping aside to let him in. We sat at my dining table, Luna resting her chin on my foot. Mr. Adams took a deep breath. "I want you to know I'm on your side," he said quietly. "This is all Karen's doing. She's managed to bully or sweet-talk a couple of the more timid board members into going along with her. But the truth is, the president, Robert Jenkins, didn't sanction any of this. He's been out of town, so Karen took advantage of his absence. Now he's back, and he's livid. He's calling a full board meeting mandatory attendance for this Friday evening." My heart lifted at the news. "Does that mean the false complaint about Luna might be dismissed?" Mr. Adams nodded. "Almost certainly. But Karen isn't going down without a fight. She's sent out some emails to a handful of residents, trying to gather last-minute support. She's doubling down on her story that your dog is aggressive, and that we need stricter policies for ESAs." I swallowed hard, feeling a rush of anger. We have so much evidence disproving that. She can't possibly think she'll win. She might be hoping that fear and confusion will be enough, Mr. Adams said grimly. Or she's planning something else. I just wanted you to be prepared. Friday's meeting could get ugly. I thanked him for the warning. As soon as he left, I texted Sharon and the others to let them know about the meeting. This was our chance to confront Karen on record, in front of the entire board and presumably many residents. We had to be organized. We had to be strong. Friday arrived with a crackle of anticipation in the air. The HOA meeting was scheduled for 6 p.m. at the community center. By 5:30, the parking lot was nearly full. Word had spread that something big was about to happen. Residents filed into the center, seating themselves in rows of folding chairs. At the front table sat the entire board, including Robert Jenkins, the HOA president, who looked weary but resolute. Karen sat near him, arms folded, eyes darting around the room. Mr. Adams gave me a small nod, and I spotted Mrs. Nichols wringing her hands nervously. Mr. Winchester had a stern expression, as though anticipating a war of words. Promptly at 6 p.m., Robert Jenkins called the meeting to order. "We have a serious matter to discuss," he began, his voice echoing in the large hall. "There have been allegations regarding an alleged dog attack, and there are proposed policy changes that could affect emotional support animals within our community. We're here to address these issues openly and transparently." Karen immediately raised her hand, launching into a tirade. The dog attack wasn't alleged. It happened, and our community is being overrun by animals that are mislabeled as ESAs. This has become a free-for-all. Anyone can claim they have a medical need, and suddenly their pet is allowed anywhere. A rumble of discontent spread through the audience. Robert Jenkins held up a hand to silence the crowd. "Before we continue, we need to address the complaint filed against Ms. Harper's dog, Luna. We have received substantial evidence contradicting the accusation of aggression, including witness statements, video recordings, and a petition signed by a significant portion of our residents." He turned to Karen. "Karen, you filed this complaint personally, correct?" Karen's face flushed. "I received the complaint from a concerned parent," she insisted. "I was just acting as their representative." "Who is this parent?" Robert pressed. Karen hesitated. "They wish to remain anonymous," she finally said. Robert Jenkins's expression hardened. "We've reached out to all the families who attended the block party. None of them report any dog attack. Without a named complainant or evidence, this board cannot in good conscience pursue any action against Ms. Harper. Therefore, the complaint is officially dismissed. Luna is cleared of all wrongdoing." A cheer erupted from the back of the room. Relief washed over me like a cool breeze on a scorching day. I glanced down at Luna, who wagged her tail as if sensing the positivity. Karen's lips curled into a sneer. "So, you're just going to let the entire community be at risk? What if next time it's real? We need rules in place now." Robert remained calm. "We already have rules, Karen. We also have federal guidelines that we are legally bound to follow. If you wish to propose changes, do so through proper channels, with transparent discussion. But we will not implement any policy that conflicts with the Fair Housing Act or that discriminates against individuals who need emotional or service animals." The crowd applauded. Karen's eyes darted around, looking for support. But even Mrs. Nichols and Mr. Winchester seemed to shrink away. Mr. Adams, meanwhile, gave me a thumbs up. Karen's composure cracked. She stood abruptly, nearly knocking over her chair. "This is outrageous," she screeched. "You're all caving to the demands of a few whiners who can't go anywhere without their furry security blankets." A shocked silence fell. Karen's words were laced with cruelty. Robert Jenkins stared at her, then shifted his gaze to the assembled residents. "I think we've heard enough," he said quietly. "Karen, I'm afraid your outburst just now is unacceptable. Your behavior in this matter has been beyond unprofessional. The board will need to consider a motion of censure." Karen's face paled. She knew what that meant. Her position on the board could be revoked if the other members agreed she was acting against the community's best interests. A flicker of panic crossed her eyes. Before she could respond, a voice from the crowd, Sharon, spoke up. "It's not just unacceptable," she said. "It's possibly illegal and definitely a form of harassment. We have to protect our neighbors from this abuse of power." Another wave of applause resonated in the hall. Karen looked around, realizing no one was rushing to her defense. She tried to speak, but her words came out strangled. She grabbed her purse and stormed out of the community center, leaving the rest of the board and residents in stunned silence. Robert Jenkins cleared his throat. "With that, I believe we can conclude this discussion. The HOA reaffirms its commitment to abiding by all local, state, and federal regulations regarding service and emotional support animals. Any board member found acting contrary to that will be held accountable." With the gavel's final rap, the meeting ended. People surrounded me, offering congratulations and relief. Talia hugged me, tears in her eyes, grateful that Luna was vindicated. Keith grinned, relief written all over his face. Sharon patted Luna on the head, praising her for being the calm in the storm. In the weeks following that dramatic meeting, the board took steps to formally censure Karen. They stripped her of any oversight regarding pet regulations and required her to attend a session on fair housing compliance if she wished to remain on the board at all. She tried to put up a fight, but it fizzled. Her credibility was shot, and she no longer had enough allies. With Karen's influence diminished, the atmosphere in Westvale Springs shifted. Residents felt more at ease. The petty warnings and arbitrary fines decreased. While the HOA still enforced reasonable rules, it did so with far less aggression. Even Mr. Winchester seemed to relax once Karen's toxic energy was removed from the equation. As for me, I received a written apology from the HOA for the stress and upheaval caused by the false complaint. They assured me that Luna was welcome in all community spaces, provided she remained well-behaved, which she always was. Sharon, Talia, Keith, and our little coalition stayed in touch, forming a support network that made Westvale Springs finally feel like the community I had hoped it would be. And Karen? She kept a low profile for a while. According to whispers, she tried to discredit the board's decision among a few of her remaining supporters, but her efforts fell on deaf ears. The last I heard, she was taking a break from her board duties to focus on personal matters. Many believed she was too embarrassed to show her face at meetings. Regardless, justice had been served in a satisfying, if dramatic, way. I could walk Luna through the neighborhood in peace, no longer looking over my shoulder for a lurking figure with a notepad of HOA rules. That sense of freedom, and the knowledge that I wasn't alone in the fight, meant more to me than any pristine curb appeal or exclusive amenities ever could.